Welcome to the Westminster Tradition, a podcast with lessons for the public service. My name is Alison Lloyd-Wright, Managing Director of the Good Trouble Group. And joining me today on Ghana land, as always, are my two fellow recovering public servants, Caroline Crozer-Barlow.
Hello, Alison.
And Managing Director of Good Government Advisory, Danielle Elston.
Hello, Alison.
Today we return with our final episode in the BSE series, or Mad Cow, for those of you like me who are struggling with the word encephalitis. Though I managed to get it right that time.
Well done.
So, just a little recap. Episode 1, we started in the late 1980s with cows acting spooky, is the exact notes Caroline has written for me. Thank you, Caroline. Government taking action... Government taking action to eliminate disease from the herd, as well as what they believe to be precautionary action to keep it out of the food chain. In episode 2, we moved into the 1990s with the dawning realisation that BSE is more transmissible to other species than was perhaps originally believed. And the controls that were trying to keep it out of the human food chain were actually, turns out, not super effective and needed to be strengthened through the introduction of cow hand washing meat hygiene services. Episode 3, panicked public response to the confirmation of BSE transmission to humans in March 1996, where the beef market collapses. There were 20 cabinet meetings in 12 days, complete chaos, and the EU banned beef exports to the world for 10 years. So we situated all of this in the context of a public response that an independent inquiry finds showed no evidence of incompetence. Caroline, where are we going today?
Look, so I wanted to spend this episode covering 3 things. One, what the kind of tail end of BSE, no pun intended, says about the role of government to keep things circulating in our economy in exceptional times. 2, how this role of government keeping things going is closely related to that original insight of Alison's back in episode 1, that there's no gap between over and under reaction. Right? Like I keep thinking about that. I know you can be underwhelmed and you can be overwhelmed, but can you ever just be whelmed? That's kind of like there is something about what's in the middle there.
90s classic, 10 Things I Hate About You. 2000s classic?
90s, late 90s, I think. We'll look it out. But finally, and then I want to return to this kind of fundamental question of decision-making in radical uncertainty.
Yes,
because I know, and particularly I think Danielle has thrown to us a few times during this season this kind of question about whether the public has a realistic sense of what government can achieve, and noting that it's sometimes...
No.
Somewhat
that's end of episode.
When I asked the question, I actually do
and our mug winner this week.
I asked the question as though I don't believe the answer is no, they don't have a realistic understanding.
Well, don't you feel like it's interesting to be recording this in the middle of the current fuel crisis? Yeah, I don't know if anyone watched Insiders this morning. We are recording on March the 22nd, and sort of listening to the discussion around the balance between how do you say to people, we hear you that you're worried and we know you're experiencing some supply shortage, and also we know there's enough fuel, please stop buying it all. Like that.
Currently it's a demand crisis, not a supply crisis.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's something for us to learn about in this context. Yeah. And what BSE showed for us is what happens when the flow of something like the beef chain stops. Right? Because what happens when people stop buying beef, is that we suddenly get all of these kind of backups that you've never thought of. So let me begin with the British beef system in the 1990s. Cattle moved from the farm to the slaughterhouse to the renderers. The offal from the kind of slaughtering of those cattle gets moved sometimes off to food, sometimes off to animal feed, sometimes off for disposal. Very little stops for long in this kind of movement thing. And the whole thing works on kind of really thin margins and constant motion. And so what happens when people stop buying beef and then producers have a ban on selling beef into the market is that you've literally got cows kind of sitting in paddocks eating food that isn't there. right? And they're heading into winter where there's not going to be any grass in the paddocks because it's England and they don't have food in the winter. And so you've got this problem of like all these cows who were expected to be dead but aren't.
Right.
Yeah. Turns out it's a problem.
And they're hungry.
And they're hungry.
And it's expensive to feed them.
Exactly right. And so there are kind of animal welfare issues, there's farm economics issues, and what are you supposed to do? So, of course, you might say, well, why don't they just go and kill them? You can't sell them, but surely you can just kill them. Well, unfortunately, you can't because, it turns out, and this is what the Ministry of Agriculture discovers very quickly after that ban is put in place in the kind of April of 1996.
The ban being that EU ban,
or the ban where the government said, we're not going to let you sell your over 30-month cows to anyone, right? They just have to go. By July, so from April to July, there's already 100,000 cows waiting to be slaughtered.
Wow.
Because you've just got all of these cows who were originally going to keep living for a bit longer who suddenly all need to be killed at the same time. So you get this huge backlog. And there's massive agitation from the public about it. And, of course, that very helpful thing where, every day there's a headline around 120,000 cows are waiting, 130,000 cows are waiting to be slaughtered.
Mm.
And what happens is that MAF sort of says, all right, why isn't this working? And it turns out, and they have to do all that kind of really detailed actually understanding your industry stuff. And it turns out it's not that there aren't enough people to kill the cows. It's once they've killed them, what do they do with the bodies? Because they can't just burn them. I believe, Alison, you mentioned burning them in the first episode, and I very kind of knowingly said, I don't think it was that. The reason why you can't just burn them is because they're worried about these prions getting into the ecosystem.
Yes.
And so they're contaminated waste.
Yes.
So what are you going to do? Can't just burn them, so you need to render them. Oh, but it turns out we don't have enough rendering, blah, blah, blah. Right? So it's a real crisis. So MAF then enter into a series of kind of market arrangements with the slaughterers and the renderers to try and build up capacity. But all this time, you've got this huge pressure of just more and more cows needing to be killed. They're just battling up. Now, look, they got there, right? So by the time we get to November 1996, they have managed to increase the weekly slaughter rate from 25,000 to 60,000. That seems pretty good. Yep. And by the time we get to March 97, they've actually arranged for the disposal of 1.35 million cattle. Oh, my God. But they have done stuff like purchase old, decommissioned, air-conditioned warehouses. And they're just piling up dead bodies of
just
cows.
Like mass fatality management.
It really is. I didn't find if there was an ice rink involved, but I wish there was. It would make a good story. So anyway, I think this, just to me, reading this story, I was struck by just how technically logistical this job was, right? It's how much do we pay them? And if we pay them too much, then maybe we get dudded, or if we pay the farm, there's all of this kind of market stuff. How do you bring on the supply but not overcharge the supply of rendering, but not end up with the taxpayer being gouged? There's all of this kind of social kind of stuff around how do you make sure that the farmers don't feel like they've just been abandoned with these kind of welfare issue cows in their paddocks. And they did a reasonably good job. And again, as consistent with everything in BSE, everyone thinks that they were terrible and did a terrible job of it. And I'm I don't know that I could organise the mass slaughter of 1 million cows in 9 months. So anyway, I thought that was an interesting starting point to think about what it is when it's our job to kind of keep things moving.
And to intervene in a very material way in a supply chain that actually is quite a lot more complex than senior government officials or ministers have understood it to be up till this point.
I think it is not a core government skill, even in the areas that might have economic development or industry assistance, to have a really detailed understanding of small and medium. And a lot of the way the UK farming structure is, we're not talking...
It is.
Yeah.
Small and medium.
It's not like Australia's kind of got the 3 biggest cattle things in the world. It's a lot of small and medium. And we're not good at understanding how all those things work. And we only ever usually stick our nose in an emergency. Yeah. And then we don't have a lot of time to learn. It's very kind of, I hope this will do.
Yeah.
Because I don't have enough time to be, super expert at it. So, it might be drought or flood or fire or BSE.
Yeah.
And we're there in a hurry.
Yeah.
And even, it doesn't matter, it doesn't even matter if people have a small or medium enterprise background, either in government or an MP. because you only necessarily know your
Yes.
SME. And so
Yep.
I don't know how many people whose job it is to step back and know supply chains really, really well.
Even not at risk of making everything COVID like that John Green book, Everything's Tuberculosis. Like even when we're in charge of the supply chain, so thinking about vaccine rollout, that was a logistical challenge for people who don't do a lot of high-end logistics at that sort of scale and rollout in terms of how do you get this to the most number of people in the most efficient way while keeping the vaccine as cold as it needs to be, while being administered by people who are appropriately skilled to administer it.
And understanding the public, and so understanding who has a car and, you know, accessibility and all sorts of things. So this is some of the hardest stuff I think government does.
Yeah. I mean, I think two thoughts on this. One is there's that really good book on Australia's pandemic exceptionalism, which was Richard Holden and someone else. I can't remember who the other person was. And they talk about even the thing where the public service had the wrong heuristics, like in the COVID vaccine procurements, right? So like the health department comes in and their heuristic is around value maximisation, right? Like they're like, it's our job not to spend too much money because we're the health department, we're always getting told off for spending money. And so they kind of placed a number of small bets. And in this context, actually, like the economist wonks in this book make the argument they would have been better to place huge bets on every kind of vaccine because the economic payoff of winning the vaccine was like way too, was substantial, right? So there's that one thought, which is we may actually not just not know it, we may actually have exactly the wrong heuristics in our head around kind of what we should be doing as public servants. And then the second thought I have is around how in COVID and the PPE procurement stuff, again, like so the protective public again, and I'm following this in the UK and the COVID inquiry, there's been a real challenge around this kind of question of probity versus fast. And that's another heuristic that really kind of bites for public servants. So they kind of like, are we just trying to get as much as we need as fast as we need? And are we okay with the idea that someone got referred in by the minister's office because they have it, right? Like, or are we doing... And I think there's something really... I feel like there's a different language for kind of exceptional supply chain interventions or a set of rules that we maybe haven't kind of written down in advance yet or something. Anyway, they were just the things that struck me.
My stray observation there as well is even when we understood some of those supply chain things in COVID, so the one that I hadn't previously understood is how much Australian freight export travels on passenger planes.
Yeah.
And if there's no passenger planes, those goods are not moving into the markets that would otherwise be buying them. But even knowing that, there wasn't really a lot you could do with that.
What are you going to do?
Because we weren't going to change the position on landing the passenger planes, so...
And this is the question, like, do we think it's our job to know all these things in advance, or is it more our job to know the millions of ways we don't know how our world comes together and know the people who can help us understand it quickly when the particular emergency strikes or something? Like, I feel,
and I was thinking, how do you get the insight in? But the other thing is, we're also talking about inside your own jurisdiction. The reality of supply chains is most of it is not inside your own country anymore.
That's right.
And so Strait of Hormuz might be about China losing 30% of its oil, but that then has some totally different supply chain, medicines.
Consequence
what Australia is going to face for the next 6 months is actually about medicines because we don't manufacture our own pharmaceuticals anymore. And you're like, how do you go from oil to antidepressants? I don't get that.
Yeah.
And it's because these chains it's not about like, do I understand my farm down the road?
Yeah.
It's like, do I understand how a ship being stopped with nothing to do with medicines is going to stop my medicines making their way into Australia.
Yeah.
And then once they get here, how may I ration or intervene for equitable access or whatever else? So it's not even within your own borders, most supply chain things that you would have to intervene in.
And I do think that was the useful thing about COVID is it helped everyone appreciate how much sovereign capability they had lost and how reliant their supply chain was on various international partners, and that maybe moving into the future, it might be worth contemplating having some degree of sovereign capability.
I think this is maybe just a kind of side thought, but I was listening to The Rest of History did a great pod actually before the Iran War on the fall of the first Iranian 1970 revolution. Anyway, and in part of it they talk about Jimmy Carter's Winter of Discontent speech, which I had never properly paid attention. Do you know this, Alison?
I do not.
Oh my God.
I'm just singing Sharif Don't Like It in my head. So.
Brilliant. So this is the 1970s. We've got the oil shocks, blah, blah, blah. And Americans are very angry about not having fuel and things are getting more expensive. And Jimmy Carter, I've really got to look it up. He gets on, national telly in his cardigan and he sort of says to everyone well, actually life is a bit tougher than we think it is. And maybe we should all just live with a little bit less. We should turn the heating down and wear our cardigans or whatever. Anyway, the story is told like a joke, right? The idea that the President of the United States would say to his people, you might accept less. That's wild, right? And then I'm maybe that's what some of this leads us to.
Absolutely. And we are prepared to do it in some circumstances, right? So South Australia, being as it is at the arse end of the Murray-Darling Basin, has, in plenty of droughts, rationed water.
Yes.
Insofar as people weren't allowed to water their gardens and you had to, do certain things and everyone was encouraged to take a short shower. And there are certain things that people are yes, we accept that this is for our shared good and I will
live with less.
Compromise.
Live with less.
And then there are other things
where it's that's an outrageous thing to do. It's really interesting just thinking through how you create those conditions.
But even that, Alison, I would say was the millennial droughts, mainly where we had the biggest amount of those water restrictions. Some of it's cultural. Yeah. So there was absolutely, if you talk to South Australian great-grandparents, they're well, the water was brown and you just couldn't use it 3 days a week and a much higher level of capacity to have less for social good. I think there's a slide out of there. I'm not prepared for my Temu to be 7 seconds late, let alone have a shorter shower. The level of expectation it's harder now for governments to say there's a social good, you will get less, you will have less.
Well, I found it fascinating watching Barnaby Joyce.
We've been conditioned to believe more is always coming.
Yes, and that it's government's job
to give me more,
to make sure,
to make it more,
to maximise what I can get and when I can get
what I can get. And even so, just Barnaby Joyce talking on Insiders last week about fuel, where he said, I don't care if there is or isn't enough fuel, people don't think there's enough fuel, and I think government should introduce rationing. And you're just that's that's a person who is in touch with a certain kind of emotional vibe. And it made me think, actually, maybe there is more appetite for some of this shared pain sharing if it felt like we're rationing so that farmers can make sure they have enough diesel, right? I think that's the ability, is the stitching together of the stories.
Yeah.
And that's what's very hard. And also the other thing they said on Insiders this morning was that the person who's telling the story has to be trusted. And that's why, some of the lessons aren't landing at the moment, because the minister in charge in the Commonwealth is just not a beloved figure in the regions. And so it's not working for them. Anyway.
So you talked earlier about how there was no gap between overreaction and underreaction in this one. Mm-hmm. Tell me a bit more about that.
Well, indeed, and I think Danielle even went there just a little bit more with her my medicine's not going to be arriving thing, right? It's this is the thing. We engage in these questions when they hit us in a particular moment, or we don't engage with them at all. And I think the challenge for us is, how do you walk this tightrope of reassurance so that people don't hoard, but also not sound out of touch? And I think more generally, kind of my overall wondering is, sometimes we act as though people are being, I know that's my early childhood background coming in. Sorry, my wondering. I think we sometimes act as though people are being irrational. I don't think that's the right framing at all. I think people, groups of people have moods, and part of the art of government is understanding the mood of a group of people. And it is the most kind of technocratic, elitist, shitful thing to say, you should all just understand numbers.
Yeah, but so I think this is part of it. I think government operates a bit too much in facts, and part of in Australian public services, so I don't mean the APS, I mean across the board, is it's seen as political to try and understand the mood of groups of people. And when I do stuff and I'm you need to be on Like the fastest way to know how things are landing is to get on kind of like the Western Sydney on a budget Facebook group, and you will know immediately if there's a longer lines coming up at the Services New South Wales, or you will find out straight away if there's a view that the police are doing something differently or things have changed. And it's like, no, that's the job of a minister's advisor because they need to get votes. And I'm like, no, you're running the service, mate. You need to know
the public in the public service.
You need to understand it is not capital P political.
Yeah.
It is not whether your red, blue, green or orange government is doing well or badly. It's, is the service I'm delivering or the decision I'm making, like, are they scared about their beef? I wouldn't go into the vegetarians on Facebook group. They're probably pretty unfussed. And that's the same thing, though. It's like, are you looking around your room and you're talking to vegetarians and saying everything's fine?
Yes.
So I think we rely far too much on facts in the public service, and the idea that, firstly, most punters have a level of detail of facts, have access to it. Secondly, whether they care if they did.
So my take is that it's also a trust issue.
Yeah.
So it's one thing for you to tell me that there's enough fuel, but why should I trust you when, depending on what has happened to me before, I may have a low and certainly lowering as a populace level of trust in government.
Yeah.
And especially when it sounds just like, no, trust me, there's fuel. How do you give people the transparency about what exists and where it exists and how you can make sure that they will get it to deal with that trust aspect?
See, I think, like, there's giving people the transparency, but actually to me it's like, how do you talk to the people that they trust? And one of the things that I found really compelling in South Australia's COVID response that I'm sure was generated elsewhere, but I just don't know about it, is that we have very high levels of vaccination because we did a lot of work with the multicultural communities, and we kind of spoke to the leaders of the people who are, like, so we spoke to local leaders and you gave them the evidence and the information because they've got the time and, like, they're engaged in this, and then they can talk to their communities. And so, like, I mean, it makes me wonder, maybe Chris Bowen needs to talk to Barnaby Joyce. Like, there's something about how do you ensure the right that the right groups, that the right leaders for the right groups, and not assume that you are going to have a trusted relationship directly with every audience. Like, there's something very important about that.
Yeah.
I wanted to just finish though on the, like, CJ quote from the West Wing, because I've been thinking about it for a long time because I don't like it because the three things aren't conceptually similar, so it offends some debating principle for me. Like, I can't work it out. But actually, and so I was like, oh, it's stupid. But actually, the more this last few weeks, I have just thought about it more and more. So in the CJ quote, she says, you've got to tell people about the potential positive, because no one thanks someone who hides things. In a crisis, people want to feel like soldiers, not victims, and information breeds confidence and silence breeds fear. Mm-hmm. Do we think, so that was said 20 years ago.
Plus, but
20 plus. Do we think that's still, I think maybe there's still rules to live by.
I mean, no one thanks people who hide things. I mean, I think that has gotten bigger and more important.
Yeah. And
it's back to the trust in government piece, which is every time it turns out we had information we didn't give, and the increasing adversarial nature of the party political part is there's more gotcha. There's more they didn't know going on. And so I think it is true that the faster you get information out and the lowering the risk about hiding things. Yeah. Like there is, part of the growth of conspiracy is the government has all this information they're not sharing with people.
As if we can find it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think on the people want to feel like soldiers, not victims. While I reject the specific framing, I agree that people do want to feel like they're contributing to a higher purpose or a greater good of some description. The water is a good example.
Yeah.
But there's just something in that how do you do that without excusing? So the risk with that line of argument is that it turns very quickly into my favourite subject, cults.
Yes.
Where, yes, I'm asking you to do this slightly shady thing that actually deeply offends you, but it's for a greater good, Caroline, and you go along with it, and then I push you a bit further, and you go along with it because it's for a greater good, and the greater good
now
is so
just
important.
Drink this.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not Kool-Aid, by the way, just to say.
Flavour Aid.
Flavour Aid.
And so I agree that it is a natural human instinct, but how do you do it in a way that overcomes that kind of information asymmetry and still feels to people like they're making a choice?
Yes.
Rather than they're being directed or instructed to do something. That's the tension there for me on that one.
Yeah.
I actually just think looking at back then and when you saying 20 and me saying it's actually probably from that season more like 24, 25 years ago, the other difference is who the translator in the middle is.
Yes.
And so of all three of those things, whether you've hidden something, whether you're giving out information, how you're breeding your social good, therefore you are a soldier, not a victim, is that they only had to manage the mainstream media. So they had their message.
Yeah.
We, they, whether it's fictional United States circa late 90s or whether it's you only had to work with a small cohort of mainstream media to get that information out, which meant, you could see where it all was. You could, when I say control, I don't mean control of the media, which I know is a bit weak.
No.
But you could, hang on, you still don't get it. Would you like to meet with a doctor?
Spend
Would you
more
like
time.
Would you like to hear?
Absolutely.
Whereas the democratisation, if that's what we might want to call it, of everyone being a citizen journalist and a citizen scientist means that even if you do all of these things, information may not breed confidence. And even if you do all of these things, people may feel like victims because someone's told them.
They're a victim.
So the filter piece in the middle is just completely different and I'm not sure we grip it up really well.
Oh, I love that because there was something old-fashioned about this that you've really nailed. That's the bit that's missing. It's like she views herself as a kind of a transparent portal through which things are moving. A very interesting thing that I learned this week is that the ways in which public sentiment campaigns are operating is changing in the context of large language models because now that most people go to a ChatGPT rather than Google for their sources of information, if you're trying to run a campaign to, undermine the credibility of a certain spokesperson who's been very prominent in a particular issue, what you do is you put out a lot of discursive stuff on the internet, like a lot of kind of like web blogs, that kind of stuff in a conversational style.
By the large language model.
That say things that are, well, of course, so-and-so is owned by the unions or owned by the blah, and then they're trying to sort of downgrade the way in which that particular source is used and upgrade this other different conversational style of source. And it was just wild.
That's so interesting.
Wild to me. And like as a person who runs a small, not-for-profit think tank, one of the kind of concrete recommendations is we've got to stop putting out our reports in PDF and we actually just need to have a standalone web page for all of our reports that just has all of the content on it because that's what's going to be scraped by. Anyway, it's just, but it does make me think, to your point, Danielle, like, have we gripped this up? I don't think we have gripped up the intermediaries.
Well, and one thing that's interesting is if you reflect on last year's federal budget process, they invited influencers and citizen journalists to be in the lockup.
Not us.
Not us.
I know. Outrageous, actually. We'll get onto that.
Hit us up next time.
Chalmers office. You know who we are.
But there was a lot of kind of outrage about that in the mainstream media, that you were letting in all these people that didn't necessarily apply journalistic standards and integrity.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think that is a sound choice for a government to be making in 100%. A context where a lot of people are getting their information through these kind of intermediary sources.
Well, and don't you guys feel that squish in this pod? Like the number of times I feel in this pod, I'm like, I'm not a journalist. I really need people to understand I'm not a journalist and I'm not applying journalistic rigour. Like we're storytelling and kicking stuff around, but don't come to us for capital T truth.
No.
This really makes me anxious.
This is the group chat. But it really makes me anxious.
But I'm not sure people can tell the difference anymore.
Yeah, well, that's why we have a very lengthy disclaimer on the end of it. But I agree. No, I agree. And I find it hard as a producer. Like when people say to us, we'd like to be on the pod, I'm like, sure, but like we're not journos.
Yeah,
so interesting. Anyway, sorry.
So I think it's a very different context was my main.
No, that was a good.
An information and trust context has moved wildly in 30 years.
So we need to update our understandings of both what are the heuristics when things stop flowing, like what are, turn off your kind of probity worries, turn off your kind of the market will sort it worries, get into a kind of whatever. Yep. And when we're thinking about trust over an underreaction, we actually need a whole set of new tools of measuring and engaging with and thinking about public sentiment. Is that a good capture?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think so.
Cool.
And my addendum to that is in this rise of kind of influencer citizen journalists, there seems to be this like worry and fear that is wrong.
Yes.
And that is a thing that we need to
get rid of.
Stop. And various kind of programs about, democratic action. And I just am not sure that is actually the right sentiment of treating people who want to be informed and want to feel like they're a part of something as noise.
Illegitimate.
Or as illegitimate is an advisable way to proceed.
Also too late. Horse bolted, like gate shut. It's all over.
So we've got a moral point here and a pragmatic point on the other side, and I think both of them are exactly right.
So, Caroline, you said you had another topic you wanted to cover, though, which was decision-making under radical uncertainty, which is just the most tremendous combination of words. Where are we going with this one?
I know, it sounds like a PhD title. Look.
Be a killer PhD.
Wouldn't it? Yeah. In one way, everything we do is in a context of uncertainty. Like, that is just nothing new. I think, though, there is something about increasing amounts of uncertainty, by which I mean that things are changing so quickly we can't predict how people will respond. We don't necessarily know what the knock-on consequences are. So, mad cows and suddenly there's not enough, renderers or whatever. Like, there's something quite different about the unknowability. So I want
both unknown and unknowable.
Yes, that's right. Whereas I think we used to have more unknowns and now we're a bit more, I like that. So I wanted to finish out by pointing out just how little we still know about BSE, because this is wild.
Is it going to be scary?
No, it's going to be bemusingly not scary.
Okay, excellent. You're fine then.
Yeah, because you asked, Danielle, in an early episode, you're like, how come no other countries had VCJD or BSE? And I was like, good question, because we know that there were cows infected with BSE who were shipped to Europe. We know that the contaminated feed, they continued to sell it in Europe for a period of time after they banned it in the UK, a la thalidomide. And even more, we know that right back at the beginning, if you think about it, there was that bogus professor who sort of suggested there might be hundreds of thousands of deaths, which isn't unreasonable if you think about how much beef people eat, right? So I just thought we'd finish with some facts. Here's some good facts. So 232 recognised cases of VCJD, 178 in the UK, and we know that that's actually probably the number because they have really good population surveillance, right? So I think you can definitely say that. And the last case was in 2016. 13 in France, 3 in Ireland, and then kind of, singles and doubles elsewhere. The modelling suggests there's a 48% chance of no more cases and maybe we'll get 1 or 2 more cases of VCJD. So it's ended, right? The BSE to VCJD has ended. And lots fewer cases than I think I would expect from how much beef people eat.
Yeah.
And the size of the response as well.
Yeah.
So that's the first fact. Second fact, spontaneous BSE is now being identified in herds.
How interesting.
And probably, pointing about the surveillance population stuff, probably was occurring before, right? But now we're seeing it. So the US has had a couple of cases, there were a couple in the UK, just one last year. With this knowledge, so we know that now essentially VCJD has ended, but also we know that there is spontaneous BSE, and we know that MBM is still used in the meat and bone meal, render, still used. There's something why was it the UK? Why did the UK end up with this cluster and no one else did? So I, of course, went down.
Or were they the only ones who caught it?
No, and so I think you can genuinely assume that certainly in the Western world they weren't, because the symptoms are so significant. So even America, which doesn't seem to have the most fully functioning population health screening, they have a surveillance they chop up everyone whose brain looks a bit like CJD.
Right.
And they do is it VCJD, is it the normal one? I fell down the rabbit hole of the excellent Maintenance Phase pod on Oprah versus beef, which one of our brilliant listeners recommended to us. And it turns out that maybe they think in the UK it was because at around the same time, and actually someone said this to me at Lois's party the other night, you remember the farmer people who were talking to me about their experience in Norfolk? They said to me that the thing that had changed, and this tracks, is that one, something else got more expensive, so people started feeding the cows more MBM and less soy, I think. So
Interesting.
there you go. And 2, they changed how hot they ran the rendering facilities, and so the MBM sort of had less, I don't know, sterilisation.
Because energy was expensive, or just because?
Just because I wish I had the answer to that. Right. So all
That's
of this
interesting.
goes to say is that you have this highly contingent set of things that happen. Everyone else is using MBM. Everyone, like all of this is happening elsewhere, and yet in the UK it leads to this very significant outbreak in the herds. Lots and lots of cows got it. Pretty significant outbreak in the humans, and yet it didn't happen elsewhere. So there's something for me about this randomness, I guess, that I want to kind of grapple with as a public servant. Like, how do you know, like, some things turn out to be something and some things don't turn out to be something? How do we make decisions in the context of that uncertainty? So anyway, that's where I wanted to go.
Yeah. Is it just a one-off, to what extent is there an iceberg?
Yes. And you might never know.
No, and it comes also down to resourcing a little bit as well, because you will be criticised in these efficient, tight environments financially if you spend government resources on an iceberg that turned out to be
A not iceberg.
a little dinghy that you went round or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no...
But equally, if you just thought it was a dinghy and you underreacted, then,
Yeah.
it's that same lack of gap.
But I don't think the public in the UK would think that 232 cases was not many. But what's fascinating is I then got ChatGPT to tell me how many people die of salmonella every year in the UK. If you recall, there was the salmonella thing.
Yep.
And each year in the UK, 33 people die from salmonella poisoning. So and I don't think people think we're underdoing it on salmonella, and I don't think people thought we were overdoing it on VCJD when it's like maybe, it's 10 people a year.
Is it about
on the time frame?
Personal responsibility? We do approach things differently, randomness for things that you can control or control your risk factors for. So the BSE is very random.
Yes.
And that's what makes
you had
it very
no control.
scary.
You couldn't have made a better choice.
Whereas, the salmonella, it's like,
Should have cooked your eggs.
avoid this, cook this like this, store it like that, heat it back up to full whatever. And there's more controls in place. So when you see those numbers, you're like, well, the government isn't not doing something. Individuals didn't reheat their rice back up to 100 after they'd left it in the fridge for 2 days. And I wonder if there's two lenses that people look at those kind of... Like, which one's government supposed to protect me from? The random. Which one do I do? The ones that I can control.
I think, it's so interesting. I always go back to the 9/11 stat that after 9/11 more people died in road crashes because, people were making an individual choice about flying versus thing. And I think, again, people were wouldn't necessarily be unhappy with those choices, right?
And I was going to say, there's no way to say this without sounding controversial. Does it matter who dies? Which is to say, for a lot of these things, influenza is a really good example.
Yeah.
The people that have the most extreme reaction, being death, are going to be otherwise vulnerable elderly people. Yeah. And so the response does not need to be as full on as where we think that actually young, otherwise healthy people might be at risk.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll controversially go further than that, which is not just the who dies, but where they die. So, again, not to use another West Wing quote, but when they're looking at going into a part of Africa, and it's like, why is a American life worth more than an African life? And I don't know, but it is. And like, we treat death rates just wildly differently depending on where in the world it is and what causes it and how much it bothers us or not. So we never take a kind of scientifically flat lens. There is a range of things that makes us care or not care.
Or even a universal human rights kind of individual, every life is equal perspective. And I do think it's really important in this conversation we've just been having about how government shouldn't patronise people by saying we've got the facts. These are exactly the kind of facts that people find really patronising when you come back and say, oh, but you're more likely to die of X than Y. And they're like, yeah, but I don't want to die of X, right? So that's that's my choice.
I don't want to dive either. Thank you so much.
It's true. So there's something in me in that around that. Look, the reason I just wanted to flag this is because at all of the given moments in the BSE crisis, they never had enough information, right? And they never, they didn't know that it turns out it's like a genetic predisposition that makes you more likely to die, right? They didn't know that it's tiny quantities of cows that can contaminate a feedlot. And if they had known that, then they would have had to have made really different decisions, but they didn't, right? I think for me, my overall lesson on this is that the good public servicing is about always being open to and learning the things you don't know and being able to shuffle them into kind of your priorities and decision making. And it's almost like the very worst thing you can do is set and forget. Like that to me is like the biggest crime in these situations is to be like, yep, done it, now we're off.
Yeah.
Because that's where you're going to be really wrong.
Yeah.
And I guess, so there's a book called Fooled by Randomness.
Ooh. Is it that Nicholas?
Yes.
Yeah. The Black Swan guy.
Yes, the Black Swan anti-fragile guy.
Yeah.
Which I think is essentially making some of these same arguments, which is we really want everything to be like a neatly causal relationship.
Yeah.
And it just isn't sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's our natural instinct as humans to want to tell a story that connects certain things and explains why this happened in this circumstance, but not
that one.
That one, which just fails to actually recognise the role of randomness in the universe.
Yeah. And that's hard for government, where government's job is to tell stories that make the world feel safe for people, right? So like then what is the job? You're saying we are a good government not because we can make everything safe because we know everything, but because we will respond in a way that accords with your values.
Yep.
Yeah. So I might wrap us up then. I think we will probably never look at burgers quite the same way again, though I continue to look at them with a high degree of affection, if we're honest. But maybe we also learn some other things along the way. Most importantly, our mug winner this week is Elizabeth, who wrote us genuinely the most hilarious email following our buzzword bingo episode about the application of buzzwords in her home life, government buzzwords in her home life. She has generously allowed us to share that on LinkedIn. So go and have a look there. It is hysterical. Till next time.
I know you can be overwhelmed, and you can be underwhelmed, but can you ever just be whelmed? I think you can in Europe.
Just some appropriately bureaucratic disclaimers. While we've tried to be as thorough in our research as busy full-time jobs and lives allow, we definitely don't guarantee that we've got all the details right. Please feel free to email us corrections, episode suggestions or anything else at thewestminstertraditionpod@gmail.com. Thanks to Pampot Audio for our intro and outro music. Till next time.